Right now, we're at the end of the first month of the year 2024, and we are hearing talk again of the possibility of World War III starting off. And so I thought this would be a good time to re emphasize fundamental intellectual mistakes or blunders that a lot of people are making concerning society. So these are mistaken beliefs that concern social science, social studies, you could say, political science, just society on a large scale, rather than a focus on internal mistakes that we make, which has been the focus of my previous talks concerning repentance, where we identify false beliefs concerning emotions in particular, namely fear, that end up sabotaging our life. So, similarly, on the external scale, on the large social scale, there are these fundamental blunders, these fundamental false beliefs that keep the pattern repeating, the social cycle of samsara, or the wheel of samsara, wheel of suffering turning, or you could call it the karmic cycle, just this pattern throughout history of one tragedy after another, and actually an acceleration of uh, one injustice after another, and one mass uh, disaster, man-made, after another. So just to get right to the main points first, so that at least if you listen this far, you'll maybe retain these key points. Basically, the reason why this pattern keeps reoccurring is because of idol worship. And what I mean by idol worship is that people are seeing other people as divine and therefore worthy of special powers that so-called ordinary people don't have. And because of this idolization, they're misled, they're deceived, and the cycle of exploitation and destruction just keeps going on. So this idol worship is actually based on, I think, two logical fallacies for the most part. Like these two logical fallacies, I think, are the most common supports or pillars of the idol worship. And those fallacies are known as appeal to authority and appeal to popularity. So the appeal to authority is assuming, these are both assumptions. So both of these fallacies fall under the category of assumptions, which is one of the three categories of logical fallacies that I've observed. So they're both assumptions, and assumptions are actually always irrational. Okay, so appeal to authority is assuming that whoever you believe is the expert, or whoever you're told is the expert, is indeed the expert, just because they're either presented that way, you know, or you were taught that they are, and so you just automatically assume that that was true, not based on any real evidence, not like, oh, well, they've demonstrated repeatedly and consistently that they give the best information on this topic, or that they always provide the best service, not based on reality like that, just based on an assumption, just based on um, what others have told you or presented to you. And this can, you know, cross over into another fallacy, which is appeal to tradition, which is simply that, oh, well, this is the way it's always been, and so it must be good. So to give a key example on that front, you might think, well, of course, the only way for us to have security is through a system of extortion, also known as taxation, right? That's the way it's always been. That's what everyone else seems to think is a good idea, so that's the appeal to popularity. And that's what these authorities repeatedly tell me and teach me, is that they are indeed good and necessary. Without a system of extortion to pay for security, we couldn't have security, right? So that's the blunder there, thinking that we actually need a form of abuse to protect us. And there's no way to actually defend ourselves against abuse non-abusively, right? Which is of course false. You can actually defend yourself and defend others without abusing them first. You don't actually have to steal from someone to protect them. That shouldn't be like an aha, like, whoa, I just blew your mind kind of statement, but unfortunately it is kind of a wild thing to say in a society, because it's a common sense truth. It's like common sense ethics, but it's been kept from us from birth, right? And we've just been bombarded with the indoctrination. So this common sense ethic of, we don't need to do something unethical for an ethical end, right? You can't achieve good through evil, right? Like this basic understanding of ethics and reality, that shouldn't be profound, right? That should just be like, of course that's the reality. But, common sense doesn't rule, because, again, we've been so indoctrinated with propaganda, and logical fallacies are the supporting foundation for that. So on a very practical, personal level here, the key to disentangling ourselves, disentangling society from this pattern, which could lead to, global annihilation, as, rumors of World War III again are circulating. Rather than repeating the pattern of, oh, what do you know? These institutions based on abuse that give unnatural, corrupting power, are occupied by abusive narcissists who end up crazily causing destruction and suffering over and over again. Like, that shouldn't be a surprise, right? We should expect that. If you create these positions in society that are founded on an abuse, which is extortion, and then give them the privilege to carry out abusive acts beyond that, that would be recognized as criminal for anyone else to do. Like, if you can just focus in on that for a moment, and you can realize, well, that's a bad idea. That's not a good blueprint for society, right? That's not going to work out. And that's exactly the case, right? Even in places where they think it's working out, like the so-called socialist victories, or great examples of socialism. Well, look what happened during the global medical tyranny, right? Where the people were most on board the socialist train, they got the worst lockdown, right? Australia now has just become a complete dystopian police state. And so, yeah, you're not actually safe by setting up a ruling class that maintains and increases its power steadily every day and year through an abusive practice known as extortion, aka taxation. This is the fundamental, I keep repeating it because it's like the fundamental truth that if you see that, then you kind of get the rest. The rest just follows. It's like, oh, well, of course they're being deceptive and corrupt and crazy and destructive again, because that's the position that they're in. They're, the very occupation that they hold is one of destruction and deception, right? Because it's based on the idea that, oh, we can do abusive things and that's actually good for you, which is false. It's a deception, right? And it also gives them this immense power, which then just corrupts their mind further and gets them even crazier. And so they become even more destructive. Like, that's just how it goes. That power corrupts, and you can't make the world a better place through evil. Like that, if those two truths would just be common knowledge, we could, like I said, disentangle from this mess. You know, it's not that complicated. It's really not. Like, people keep looking at all these problems in the world and in their personal lives, and 9 times out of 10 they originate from an institution, from the establishment, but they don't recognize that common denominator. It's like they'll be complaining about something going on at a state school, like some awful thing that they're either doing or teaching to children, but they don't recognize, well, this is from the state school, right? This isn't like a neighborhood homeschool operation, you know what I mean? It's the state school. It's coming from the institution of the establishment, right? Which has a pyramidal structure, chain of command, and as you go up, it gets worse and worse. And as we're shown in the Gospels, right, who's at the top is actually the enemy of humanity. So it would make sense that the commands coming down from the top would end up being destructive. You know, or whether it's the medical establishment, also a huge, you know, social institution that has this hierarchy, right? It's part of the pyramid, and as you go up, it's run by more and more powerful and corrupt people, right? And so what they're pushing should be expected to be bad, but yet people follow their lead. It's like, oh, well, they told me I need to, you know, inject my child with these 20 different injections, and I don't know what's in them. I don't really know what's in these injections, but I'll just trust them. And then, you know, never mind the heavy metal content, right? Never mind autism rates like going through the roof, right? Like, never mind reality that shows that there is definite harm occurring. And just never mind the fact that you're assuming that they are the expert just because they're presented to you as the expert, on the one hand, which is the appeal to authority, and also because you might have everyone else around you saying, oh yeah, that's what my doctor said too, so that's what I'm going to do too. And so then you got the appeal to popularity backing it up. And so you just keep following the destructive lead of these destructive narcissists at the top of the pyramid. Like, that's just the pattern over and over and over again. Political, obviously, you know, oh, here's your new so-called savior, right? So everyone invests in this new figure thinking that they're going to save the day, and then it turns out, oh, they're not really coming through like I thought they would, you know. Or, oh, you know, it's not their fault. It's the other side, you know. And if we can just take back this institution, that leads me to another little side point here that's important, which is if you want to know who the controlled opposition is, they're the ones saying, take back the institutions. I was just listening, I subscribe to some folks that I know for sure controlled opposition just to see what they're saying. And what he was repeating was, he was talking about the entertainment industry, right, which is another, and calling it out as satanic, which is true. But then it's like the Hegelian dialectic of, here's the problem, and here's your reaction of like, oh, this is disgusting. And so what's the solution? Take back the institution, right? And he even used the words like institution, industry. He's not telling you to abandon these institutions of power. He's saying, oh no, you can reclaim them, which just means like change your subscription from this company to that company, or whatever, or change your vote from this guy to that guy, and you think you've like taken back. But see, the thing is, you don't want to take it back, you want to reject it. That's the actual solution. And the reason for that is because of the fundamental flaws, the fundamental immorality of those institutions, of the system itself, which again is based on abusive practices, disempowerment, deception, and serve as a vehicle to empower already power corrupted individuals. Just another side note here on narcissists, which I've mentioned a couple times. So a true narcissist is just a habitual abuser, right? They're just someone who has become possessed with the habit of abuse. They just enjoy it. That's just their main drive. They want to maximize the amount of abuse that they can distribute to other people and animals around them. And so the most sustainable way to do that is deceptively, right? So that's where you have covert narcissism, where they are passive aggressive on a regular basis because they oftentimes get away with it, so they can just keep at it and get their fix, so to speak, that way. Well, what better vehicle for a narcissist who wants to get away with abuse than a system that actually legitimizes it and actually says, oh, you're actually our savior over here. Thank you. You're helping us. Oh, you're taking this money out of my paycheck every 2 weeks. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, you're claiming ownership over my body and the body of my children and want to inject them with poison. Oh, thank you so much. My wonderful caretaker, right? So what better institution than the political institution for a narcissist? And that's why they're mostly narcissists there. It's the perfect place for them to go. I'll finish with another related point that might seem kind of random here, but it's not, and that is rejection of the non-aggression principle as a foundational principle for society. People say, oh, you think if we do without these institutions, people are just going to like magically obey the non-aggression principle? So if you only think for, I guess, 5 seconds straight, that can seem smart. But if you think a little longer than that, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, right? So what they're arguing is we need to set up an abusive system in order to exercise defensive force against abuse, right? Because they're saying, oh, well, people might be violent. So they're really saying, well, we need to have some kind of defense against violence, right? And that's true. Of course, defensive force against violence is a good and needed thing. So then the question is, well, what's the best way to bring that about, to manifest that in society? Is it to set up a ruling class that is based on violence, that gets their paycheck via violence, and that then get additional privileges out of thin air, basically? They just make new directives and laws and policies that just give them more and more power through their interpretation of constitutions or whatever, or by declaring an emergency, right? Is that actually going to increase the capacity for defensive force, or is it actually making us more vulnerable to an abusive ruling class and now global government? Well, the answer is definitely the latter. So this mocking of like libertarian perspective, where they say, "Oh, you're just naive. Like you just think like if you just say non-aggression principle, like you can snap your fingers, and then everyone's just gonna obey the greatest commandments of Jesus," which is one and the same with the non-aggression principle, by the way, since love is the opposite of abuse and aggression is a form of abuse, along with deception and theft. So the blunder there is it's actually psychological projection. They're saying you're naive, thinking like people are just going to magically be non-abusive, when that's not actually, it's a straw man argument. That's not actually what's being argued in the first place. It's not saying, oh, if we get rid of government, there's not going to be any violent people anymore. It's saying the best way to combat violence is to not legitimize it in the first place and to not set up these institutions that are carrying out violence on a daily basis. You can actually establish security. There are private security forces that don't utilize extortion as the means of their employment, right? People can arm themselves and their families and form militias. This is non-abusive, right? You don't need to establish this entire political beast in order to protect yourself from abuse, right? Because it just ends up coming back around. Like you're creating a monster and then feeding the monster to protect you from monsters in the world. It just doesn't make any sense. The magical thinking, I guess you could say, or the naive thinking, is thinking that, one, we can actually make the world a better place through an evil. That's magical thinking. That's false thinking. It's a false belief. And two, this magical thinking that power doesn't corrupt, which it does. And three, thinking like, oh, this pattern throughout history of, that's not only, something you can just reason would be true, but you can actually observe, right, through countless examples throughout history and current events, including the possibility, again, of World War III kicking off. All these genocides, all these acts of torture, all of this tyranny, state-sponsored terrorism, genocides, which I may have mentioned, but bears worth repeating. How often statists and socialists just want to sweep democide under the rug. You can't make the world a better place through evil. So our best chances of combating evil are through good by itself, not through creating this entire system of abuse and then hoping that's going to work out the best. And just an additional point here, solidification of what you could call the libertarian or voluntarist perspective. If you're absolutely convinced that creating this institution of power that steals money from an entire population is actually the safest way to go, and that's the way, and that's what you want to participate in, okay, right? But why do you think it's okay to force everyone else in, right? Like why do you think that someone who, or a state, to start with, that wants to secede, like Texas, for example, Why are they bad in right off the bat just for wanting to no longer be in a relationship, right? Like if you're in a intimate relationship or a marriage with someone, and one partner is abusive to the other, you wouldn't say, oh, the abused partner can't leave. If the abused partner decides to leave, they're a bad person, right? Most people wouldn't say that, right? Because that's sane. But on the larger scale, it's like, oh no, now something's changed because society. No, it hasn't actually changed. The ethics are 100% the same. But what they'll do is they'll appeal to fear. They'll say, oh, well, if they do that, if this state secedes, there's going to be all these bad consequences, right? But again, who are you to control someone else's life and who they are in relationship with based on your assumption of what bad thing might happen to them, right? Again, it wouldn't work on the small scale. You couldn't say to the woman being abused, well, yeah, I understand you don't like this relationship, but if you were to leave this guy, I mean, what's going to happen to you? It's going to be even worse. You're going to be out there homeless or whatever, right? And that's actually what oftentimes the abuser says to the victim, right? To keep them in the relationship. And so you just got these like cheerleaders for abusers who think they're intellectuals. Or maybe they're just controlled opposition and, propagandists and agents of the state. Probably a bunch are. But yeah, it just comes back to basic ethics, Abuse is bad. You can't make the world a better place through abuse. Extortion is a form of abuse. Yes, we want defense. Let's get defensive forces put together. Let's up our own personal defense without abusing others. The end. There, I just solved it, Like that wasn't that hard. It's just sticking with basic ethics and not thinking something changes when you increase the scale. It's like people have their critical thinking go down the drain once the quantity of people reaches a certain number. I don't know what it is. It's like, oh, you're talking about 10 or more people? Oh, no, now things are different. Ethics has changed. You reach the magic number 10. And so now we need to have a whole system of extortion. Now we need to have these politicians who have the right to do abusive things that are criminal for us to do. Really? It's just, there's nothing there. It's just logical fallacies. It's appeal to fear. It's appeal to authority. Appeal to tradition. It's just a bunch of hot air. And as long as that illusion is continued to be believed in and fed, well, it's just going to keep repeating, right? And you're just going to see whatever the next tragedy or destruction is as a reason to continue it even further, right? Which is, again, the Hegelian dialectic. Whenever there's a destructive or violent act, they tell you, well, that's reason why you need us even more, right? And returning to the topic of secession, right? They'll say, well, you can't secede, you can't decentralize, you can't privatize and decentralize because the centralized state power is going to do something bad, right? So, again, appeal to fear, appeal to, I forget the English translation, but I think in Latin it literally translates like appeal to the stick. They're just saying, well, if you don't, something bad's going to happen, either indirectly or directly. It's, better stay in line, So, stay controlled, stay in fear, reject fundamental ethics, reject freedom, reject liberty, and, keep the cycle going. Keep the parasites latched on, and, just continue with damage control as cancer, autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetes, on and on, as the world is just increasingly toxified and made more and more unhealthy, lemmings just going off the cliff into oblivion. And then what will be the solution? Oh, well, we should all escape this toxic world through virtual reality and artificial intelligence. And here's your brain chip to bring you to utopia, right? All right, I'll leave it there. I hope you were able to absorb some of these points, even though I didn't present them perfectly, and occasionally might have sounded a bit stuck up or whatever slander you want to throw. Or, maybe I did occasionally misspeak or, didn't speak 100% virtuously, and if so, I apologize. But I hope you can still take what was truthful in a important to the world kind of way and leave aside the rest. All right, thanks for listening.